Today I'm going to talk to you about a number of things. First, I'm going to share with you some metrics on the CPO market. Then I'll talk a little bit about some emerging technologies that are poised to change our industry. And then lastly, I'll talk about how we can use data and analytics to really get a good feel for how those technologies are going to impact our industry. So first, for those of you who are not familiar, Experian Automotive acquires title and registration data from all 50 states. We aggregate and analyze those data and provide the results of those analyses back to you, the industry. And when I look at the market, I can look at it from a total registrations perspective, which would tell me that there's about 17 million units annually that are sold in this country. Or I can look at it from an individual retail perspective. That is the number of units that are sold to individuals like you and I. And when I look at that, I can see that post-recession, we're doing a good job. Industry has been climbing. I can see that there's some seasonality. That only tells me about new. Now, with our partnerships with some of the automotive manufacturers, I get insights into certified pre-owned sales. And when I combine the new individual retail with the CPO, I see that the CPO contribution of that combined percentage is 8.2%. I can also look at lease penetration. Now, these three metrics work together. The new 27% of the new market is lease, and those off-lease units become CPO in many cases. When I look at CPO, or when I look at lease penetration, I know that lease penetration is highest in the Northeast. So I can get a sense of what's going on geographically. And the blue bars here represent CPO share of sales in the Northeast. Purple bars, areas outside the Northeast. Connecticut is a strong CPO market. 13% of all CPO, or 13% of all new plus CPO sales occur in Connecticut. Nearly 12% from Massachusetts. The majority of the states in the Northeast are here. But it makes me wonder, what if more of those off-lease units could be placed in other markets? Maybe markets like Omaha, Nebraska, where there's not a strong lease market, but taking some of those off-lease units, can I put them into a market like Omaha and get a higher loyalty rate? But I want to get some greater insights into what's going on with the market. And there's a lot going on in this chart. On the horizontal axis, from left to right, I have lease penetration. And on the vertical axis, I have, the percentage of CPO relative to new, and the bubble size represents the size of the individual retail market. The blue bubbles are luxury brands. And not surprising, we see luxury brands with high levels of lease penetration and a high percentage of CPO sales. The non-luxury brands in red, Ford, Toyota, Honda, Mazda, lower levels of lease penetration, lower levels of CPO. So it begs the question, is there a balancing act? Can I increase lease penetration to increase my annual unit sales, but have a feeder system to get those off-lease units into the hands of certified pre-owned buyers? Think of it more like this. Can I have a CPO lead generation system where I pair somebody looking for a used BMW 3 Series with somebody that already has it and connect the dots between the two of them, and I get that new BMW owner into their next BMW, and now I've reduced the time to turn, and I've increased vehicle sales on both the new side, and I've increased profitability on my CPO. And we can use data and analytics to help us discern if that's possible. But I want to dig a little deeper, and I want to better understand some other metrics. What value is it to me as a brand to have certified pre-owned transactions? Well, those owners who buy certified pre-owned are more loyal to their brands, their manufacturers, and their lenders than any other population. And owners of certified pre-owned vehicles who buy new also have high rates of loyalty. So if I use my example for Omaha, and I take off-lease vehicles and I put them into Omaha and I certify them, can I strengthen my brand in Omaha, Nebraska? I can use analytics, data, and predictive modeling to figure that out. But to do that and make it valuable, I need to create a value proposition for buyers. And we've got a lot of forces impacting our industry right now. One, vehicle acquisition costs have been increasing. Vehicles cost more. They're higher quality, they last longer. And as a result, finance terms are increasing. My colleague Melinda Zabritsky today said that 1% of all loans are now more than 85 months. That's a long time to finance a vehicle. We're also in a situation with these longer lengths of ownership and these situations with post-warranty expense where post-warranty maintenance has become custom. It's normal now. We're used to taking our vehicles in for service. 10 years ago, if our vehicle got outside of warranty, we'd be quick to turn it in and get another new one. That's not the case anymore because most of the time when we get outside of warranty, we're still not in a positive equity situation. And when we look at young people, vehicle purchase is no longer their first form of debt. They have student loans. They have credit cards. They have subscription services. So the vehicle is an added expense on an already taxed income. So you've got to work with your customers to establish a value proposition that works for them and works for you. And it not just works for them today, but it works for them for years to come. Now, over the course of my career, I've spent a lot of time analyzing loyalty and trying to better understand consumer behaviors. And I use this chart quite frequently, or this diagram quite frequently. And I don't care if you're selling a new vehicle or selling a used vehicle, or if you're a franchise dealer or an independent dealer, but if you're trying to build a value proposition, you have to understand your consumers' behaviors. And so if I look at the vehicle ownership life cycle and I purchase a vehicle, the next action that I have with that vehicle is my first service appointment. And in a perfect world scenario, I service that vehicle where I purchased it. And I have all of my scheduled maintenance done there, all of my warranty, all of my recalls, all of my repairs. And when it comes time for me to re-enter the market, perfect world scenario, I buy from the dealer again. I have dealer loyalty, dealer profitability, brand loyalty, brand profitability. But in reality, there's other forces. If I'm a franchise dealer, I have other stores in the network. So I may buy close to home, service close to work. And that's okay as long as I understand that behavior. And when it comes time for scheduled maintenance, I may go back and forth between stores, and the same for warranty and recall and repairs. And ultimately, when it comes time for me to re-enter the market, I may purchase from that other store. And I become a brand loyalist, but a dealer defector. And our industry is very complex. We have other entities out there. And the intent with this is that these circles represent centrifugal force. And the further away I get from the dealership, the less likely I am to come back and purchase from that dealer again. So when it comes time for my scheduled maintenance, I have any number of quick oil change facilities that I can go to. Repair, I can go to Sears or Firestone or any number of repair facilities. And I become less loyal to the dealer and to the brand. So we've got to analyze consumer behavior, try to engender higher levels of loyalty, and build a value proposition for consumers. And we can use data and analytics to do that. But before we get to that, I want to change gears and talk about a few emerging technologies that are poised to really revolutionize our industry. And we'll talk about how data and analytics can be used to assess the impact that those new emerging technologies are going to have on your business. And I want to start with electric vehicles. Now, I've got a fair amount of experience with electric vehicles. Out of high school, my first job was in the Air Force, and then my first real job was at the General Motors Proving Grounds. And for those of you who are not familiar, the Proving Grounds are GM's test labs. They contain over 100 miles of test tracks and roads. And my job was that of a test driver. Pretty cool job. I'd take a vehicle, take the steering wheel off of it, put one on that would measure steering wheel angle and steering wheel torque. I put a number of sensors throughout the vehicle. They would measure yaw rate and roll, fore and aft acceleration, speed, and I would go out and run a series of tests. And one of the first vehicles I had the opportunity to test was the EV1. Now, this was 1995, and this was a fully electric vehicle that was available to the public. The range on this vehicle was 60 miles. I never once got 60 miles out of it because every time I got into that vehicle, I hammered it. And I watched the range go from 60 down to 30. And the reason I did that was because it was so damn fun to drive. That vehicle was so quick off the line, tons of torque, and it was really quiet. It was a lot of fun to drive. And from 1996 to 1999, GM sold 1,100 units of the EV1. Didn't sell them, they leased them. And in 2000, GM canceled the program. And all the vehicles were crushed, as you see in the lower left-hand corner there. Well, why did they abandon the program? Well, gas prices were about $1 a gallon. And more profit could be made on trucks and SUVs than on electric vehicles. And the volume wasn't there. They leased just 1,100 of them. Now, 20 years later, we have an emerging technology, or this emerging technology is still trying to gain speed. 3 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to get behind the wheel of a BMW i8. Now, full disclosure, this is not a fully electric vehicle. This is an electric vehicle, or it's a plug-in hybrid, really. It's got an electric motor with 15 miles of range, but the powertrain is really unique. It's an electric vehicle with a 3-cylinder twin-turbo gasoline engine. And I think this represents a potential change in our industry. These electric motors being paired with small, fuel-efficient vehicles. Now, this vehicle is designed to be a supercar. It's not a supercar. It doesn't have that kind of acceleration, but it's fast. It handles amazingly well. It's fun to drive. I'm not a supercar fanatic. I've often said that if I could afford a Ferrari, I wouldn't buy one, but I want that car. It's pretty cool. Now, my friends at Tech Alliance, who provide global vehicles and operation data, tell me that there are 1 billion vehicles on the road, but 0.06% are EVs. Over a quarter of all the EVs in the world are in the United States. And the market that has the highest penetration of EVs is Norway. But yet, even the market with the highest penetration of EVs, penetration is less than 2%. So we still haven't gained any real momentum with electric vehicles. But battery costs are declining. General Motors said recently that their cost per kilowatt hour dropped 10% from 2012 to 2016 to $145 per kilowatt hour. They expect that to drop another 30% to $100 per kilowatt hour in the next 5 years. And yes, after abandoning the electric car in 2000, GM's back in the electric car game. Just yesterday, Motor Trend announced their car of the year was the Chevrolet Bolt, a fully electric vehicle. Toyota is experimenting with magnesium batteries. These batteries build upon hydrogen storage properties, but they're lighter and they're less costly. And it doesn't really matter what you feel about global warming, whether you believe it or don't believe it. I think most people would agree that we have to do more to protect our planet. We only have this one. Any damage we do can't be replaced. It's not like we can just go buy another planet. And there's an impact to our public health as well. So I think we'll see more adoption of EVs in the future based upon a couple of propelling factors. One, technology is improving. If you've had the opportunity to look at a Tesla and the technology that exists within there, it's amazing. We're seeing huge advancements in technology as it relates to electric vehicles. I've seen Tesla charging stations strategically located halfway between Detroit and Chicago to eliminate range anxiety, which is one of the drawbacks for electric vehicles. Costs are reducing. General Motors said their costs are dropping significantly. Toyota is looking at new technology. So as more and more manufacturers begin to evaluate battery technology, they're going to develop more advanced solutions. And more people every day are growing more concerned about our environment, which will help the EV value proposition. In Tesla, Elon Musk specifically is doing a lot around this. And with Tesla, he has the car and the power wall, a battery that is attached to your house that can pull energy off the grid at times of non-peak demand and store that energy to provide cost savings to consumers. And with Solar City, they've developed solar shingles. They look like regular shingles on a house as opposed to solar panels that can collect the energy from the sun, and that energy can be captured in the power wall and stored for later use. And so it's building upon renewable energy factors that'll help the EV value proposition in the future. Now, one of the technologies that Mr. Musk has implemented into the Tesla is autopilot. It's a form of self-driving vehicle autonomy. And I personally believe that autonomous vehicles are going to have the greatest impact to our industry over the next several years. McKinsey & Company estimate that by 2030, by 2030, 30% of all vehicles on the road will be autonomous. That's just 13 years away. And if I look at the average age of vehicles on the road today, it's 11, which means 3 years from now, in 2020, vehicles that are produced will see their end of life driven not from normal wear and tear, but from a replacing technology. If I have 30% of the vehicles on the road that are autonomous by 2030, that means I'm past the early adopter curve for technology adoption. And my adoption is going to accelerate from there forward, which means every vehicle produced after 2020 will see that does not have autonomous driving features, we'll see it being replaced with one that does. And a driverless car, in theory, can be in motion 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is a vast difference from what we see today. Think about your car today. How often is it in use? Not much. So if a vehicle, and the goal of autonomous vehicles is really to reduce human error, save lives through a reduction in human error. And if that's the case, I probably don't need the 4,000-pound tank that I drive around in today with a bunch of airbags and all these different sensors. I might be able to take cost out of the vehicle and end up with something more akin to Tata's $2,500 nano car. I could potentially see a vehicle change completely. No steering wheel, no pedals, nothing, and have it transform into a rolling living room. And if I need to take control, maybe I grab something more akin to an Xbox joystick to control the vehicle. We could see commuter pods, vehicles that'll get us from point A to B. We could see vehicles that provide delivery services. And I don't think we'll see much of the flying drones in the immediate future, but autonomous delivery vehicles, something more like the picture in the lower right-hand corner here, I think can be a reality, specifically as it relates to packages from Amazon or pizza delivery. That little vehicle there could deliver a pizza right to my front door while sharing the roads and highway with semis and passenger cars. So it really changes how things are happening. Now, I don't think we'll see flying pizza box delivery like this, but autonomous vehicles are happening. They've driven millions of miles on our roads and highways today. And their goal, as I said earlier, is to reduce human error, save lives through a reduction in human error. And to do that, they're going to have analytical models that prioritize life. There will be decisions that are made by computers to determine what is the best avoidance strategy. And as a result, our vehicles will change. Another emerging technology that's really having an impact on our industry today are ride and car sharing services like Lyft and Uber. Earlier this year, Lyft CEO John Zimmer wrote a paper entitled The Road Ahead. And in it, he outlined a couple very important metrics. One, he said, the average vehicle is used just 4% of the time. And the other 96% of the time, it sits idle. He also said that car ownership costs the average American $9,000 per year. So not a very good value proposition for something that is only used 4% of the time. Now, in his paper, Zimmer outlined a couple of different things. One, he said that he believes in the next 5 years, that autonomous vehicles will account for 50% of Lyft's rides and 100% in 10 years. He believes that in 9 years, by 2025, private car ownership will all but end in major US cities. And as a result, a city's physical environment will change. And what he means by that is this: spaces today that are occupied by parking lots and parking garages could be reclaimed and transformed into parks or used for alternative purposes. And we've seen some of that historically. San Francisco, I think, is a really good example of this. San Francisco, the downtown area used to be separated from the Port of San Francisco by a two-story highway. And in the early 1990s, that two-story highway was torn down. And it opened up the downtown area to the Port of San Francisco. And there was a little bit of an economic renaissance that occurred in the Port of San Francisco as new stores and dining options opened up, and it opened up the landscape to the port. But as it relates to Lyft and Uber, there's two populations that are really poised to change the industry and vehicle ownership going forward. The first is with college students. If a college student can navigate 4 years of school without having a car, I think there's the potential that they could migrate to more urban areas with greater opportunity of ride and car sharing services and public transportation. And the reason being is this: student loan debt is increasing. We hear it every single day. And incomes are remaining flat. So a student graduating from college can't afford to pay their student loan, live on their own, and have a vehicle. The student loan's not going away. So it's either they have a car and live with mom and dad, or they live on their own and don't have a car. And I think the car is on the short end of the stick on that one. Another population poised to better adopt ride and car sharing services are business travelers. I myself, over the last several weeks, my travels across the country, have been using Uber. And I think as more and more business travelers start to use Uber and Lyft, we'll see greater adoption at home. So going out for drinks with your spouse, grab a Lyft, late night party, get an Uber. But I think what is more likely to happen is that we'll see expense policies change. It's not uncommon today for rental car companies to negotiate preferred agreements with organizations for rental cars. But soon businesses are going to wise up to the fact that it's cheaper for those business travelers to use Uber or Lyft than to get a rental car. And as a result, we could see rental policy or expense policies change. Combine that with the fact that we have an increase in telecommuting. So now the two-car family can go down to one. If I have the option to use Uber and Lyft, maybe I don't need two cars. If I'm telecommuting, my vehicle's sitting more idle than it normally is. That 4% usage metric goes down to something less than that. The next emerging technology that's poised to change our industry are connected cars. Those cars that are connected to the internet and have the ability to send and receive data and interact with other entities. And connected cars are cool because they can tell us a lot, not only about the car, what's going on with the different sensors, how far it's being driven, how fast it's going, how hard someone is braking, but it tells us a lot about the driver. Where are they going? Are they spending their time at ballparks? Are they spending their time at shopping centers, bars, educational facilities? Having a better understanding of how a consumer is using their vehicle allows us to better understand how to engage and interact with those individuals. And connected cars are the definition of big data. I work in an analytical environment. I talk to analysts all the time. And I have people tell me all the time, oh, I work with big data. I have 1 million records. It's not 1 million records that make something big data. Connected cars have the ability to generate 1 million data points in a minute. Combine that times the 260 million vehicles on the road in the US, that's really big data. Combine that with everything else that we know about the consumers that are driving them, the demographics, their social media engagements. That becomes really big data. And it becomes very difficult to analyze it. But that's what brings me here today. to talk about how you and your organization can use data and analytics to develop a competitive advantage. Now, when I talked about EVs a minute ago, I told you I worked at the GM Proving Grounds, and one of my experiences there was working with an engineer who brought in a vehicle, and he said, hey, Brad, we have to test this vehicle, and we got to test it quickly. I said, all right, so I got right to it. I pulled the steering wheel off, put the new steering wheel on, put all the sensors on the vehicle, went out and ran the test as fast as I could, and brought the vehicle back. I uploaded the data, put the vehicle back together, and sent it on its way. And a few hours later, the engineer came down and talked to me. He said, hey, you have to test that vehicle again. Well, that really pissed me off because I prided myself on doing the job right the first time. And he explained to me that there was noise in one of the sensors. And I was mad at myself at that point because this was something that I should have noticed in my quality checks of the data. But I didn't. And I quickly realized that it was the adage, garbage in, garbage out. His analysis was useless because the input data were unusable. A few weeks later, I shared this story with another engineer, and he shared with me this quote that has become increasingly important and relevant over the course of my career, and it is this: measurement is the first step that leads to control and eventually to improvement. If you can't measure something, you can't understand it. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. If you can't control it, you can't improve it. Now think about that for a second. All of us get handled objectives, whether it's to increase sales year over year by 10%, increase market share by some number. Are we really measuring the right thing? Do we understand everything that goes into that measurement? Do we think we really understand it? And what do we have to do to further control it? Because it's then and only then that we can really improve upon it. Now, when we look at applying data and analytics to our businesses, it becomes part art and part science. The science lies in the analytical routines that we use to analyze the data, the art in how we apply our business acumen. Now, I'm not a big reader, but I have read a couple of books in my life, literally two, and one of them was called Competing on Analytics. And it was written by Thomas Davenport and Jeannie Harris. And it started out as a series of Harvard Business Review articles that they later transformed into a book, and Mr. Davenport has since gone on and written a couple of other books. But what was great for me about this book was this visualization that he put together. And it does a really good job of differentiating between reports and analytics. Now, I started out this conversation by telling you about the certified pre-owned market. I told you what, where, how many, and when. But I didn't tell you what's the best that could happen. I told you CPO market share was 8%. I didn't tell you what the best it could be is. That's where we have to use predictive analytics. Now, all of our organizations have a data guy or an Excel guy, somebody that creates Excel reports or data of some sort. And we often interchange the words reporting and analytics for them to mean the same. But looking at this, it's clear that they are not. Reports tell us things that happened historically. They don't tell us why it's happening, what's likely to happen next, and what's the best that can happen. And that's really where we have to start to look at, how can we best use data and analytics to develop a competitive advantage? We have to start by ensuring our data house is in order. Do we have the right data? Are the data accurate? Have they been cleansed, standardized, and enhanced with other sources? If they haven't, reach out to your local Experian rep. We can help you. It's what we do. Data is our business. Once you've done that, then you can start to identify the emerging trends most likely to impact your business. Is it EVs? Is it autonomous vehicles? Ride and car sharing services? Connected cars? Something else? Which technologies represent opportunity? Which represent risk? Then we can get into the business of establishing short-term operational objectives and long-term strategic goals. We want to capitalize on the opportunities while mitigating the risks. These are really exciting times to be working in our industry. And I'm more optimistic about the future of our industry now than ever. But I know that building a competency in analytics will become increasingly important and ultimately determine all of our abilities to succeed. Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Brad, thank you very much. Let's give Brad another round of applause.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any questions? Let's go over here. It's all right. I need the exercise.
Thanks. My question really revolves around the autonomous cars and the legal implications of it. So how is that going to be accounted for? An autonomous car gets in an accident and someone's killed because the technology failed or a sensor didn't work. Who's going to be liable? Is it going to be truly, like Ron Burgundy and his friends taking the car trip to San Diego and they're drinking in the van and, oh, it's on cruise control and car flips over multiple times. I think that part really may hamper how quickly this technology comes to market, especially in today's litigious society.
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate the Anchorman reference. I'm a huge fan of Anchorman. As it relates to autonomous vehicles, there's a huge success story behind it today. I mean, millions of miles have been driven with very few accidents and very few human interactions or human takeovers of those vehicles. And I think those are going to be a critical data point that will inform our legislators and the adoption of the technology. Ultimately, somebody's going to have to bear responsibility, but I think the advancements in technology will aim to reduce human error, and I think what we'll likely find is that any accidents involved with autonomous vehicles, there'll be some level of human responsibility or human error that's at fault, and that will further propel the adoption of autonomous vehicles.